some of you may have noticed what the problem was for at least one of them, maybe both, was the streets being blocked off around here for the road races they're doing. I was affected by it on the way in as well. But we're going to go full steam ahead here now. I want to introduce both speakers. First, Kim Foreman is the Executive Director for Environmental Health Watch here in Cleveland, where she focuses on environmental justice issues and adverse outcomes of environmental exposures, both indoors and outdoors, that disproportionately impact poor and minority communities. She has been with Environmental Health Watch for 17 years, starting even before she graduated from Case Western Reserve University in 2001. Did I get that right from your bio? Okay. With a degree in sociology and a minor in chemistry. Her online bio lists at least a dozen major projects she has developed and managed, which include, this is only a small sample, Easy Does It cooking classes, which sounds interesting, another called Greenhouses, 2 words, and Greenhouses, 1 word, Neighborhood Leadership for Environmental Health, Race, Food, and Justice Conference attendance, over 3 years, and Invest in Children research project. Her activities have also included projects dealing with mold, cockroach allergen reduction research, lead prevention, asthma trigger control outreach and education projects, and she has served on several boards and advisory committees, including, again, just a small sample, University Hospitals Rainbow Babies and Children Community Advisory Board, City of Cleveland Climate Action Advisory Council, Cuyahoga County Board of Health, National Safe and Healthy Housing Coalition, and Rid All Green Partnership. I want to put in a comment about the last one. Those of you who from time to time take the RTA line downtown, either the red or the green, you're going to go past a area that's off to the south that has hoop houses, and there once upon a time there was a teepee there. That's the Rid All plot, whatever you want to call it. They raise stuff in those hoop houses, including fish that you might get if you eat in one or another of Cleveland's finest restaurants. It's an interesting place, and I don't know, maybe you can comment a little bit more about that. So Kim is a very, very busy person, and we're happy she was able to make time to be with us this morning. Mike Foley is the current and first director of Cuyahoga County Department of the Cuyahoga County Department of Sustainability, which was a position created in early 2015 under County Executive Armin Budish's administration. From the press release in February 2015, it said, the Department of Sustainability's core mission is saving money on energy costs and propelling green economic development. There was more about it, but Mike can tell us about it as he goes along here. Prior to this work, he was a state legislator starting in 2006, representing for 8 years the people of the 14th House District, which is Brook Park, Parma Heights, and parts of Cleveland. In the legislature, he was active in environmental policy and fought for clean lake and clean energy. He has also been long involved in housing issues, having served with the Cleveland Municipal Housing Court, as well as 9 years with the Cleveland Tenants Organization, including several years as the organization's executive director. As an attorney, Mr. Foley has successfully represented victims of the first predatory lending cases in Cuyahoga County in the late 1900s. Late 1900s. Late 1990s. I don't want to age you prematurely here. And he has helped victims of security deposit scams and families hurt by lead-based paint. Mr. Foley earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Dayton and his law degree from Cleveland Marshall College of Law. He has been married to his wife, Chris, for 28 years, and they have 4 children. I should announce, of course, you can see he's also a very busy man, and to illustrate that point, he must unfortunately leave immediately after the forum today because he has another speaking engagement at this little Earth Day thing that they're having at the Berea Fairgrounds. So they have elected Kim to go first, so please join me in welcoming our speakers this morning. being
you.
flexible.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Hello. Thank you so much, and thanks for the introduction. I appreciate being here, and every time I can talk and maybe hopefully make connections, I learn a lot, and hopefully the people sitting here will learn something out of this presentation. So I work with a lot of partners, and we've worked over the years with a lot of folks. I just became a director like a year and a half ago, so pretty much I was the associate director, and I was very much entrenched in the neighborhoods and working with folks and working through processes of exchange and understanding where people's needs and where the gaps were. So I'm, elevating my position, but I'm also still connected to what I learned over 4 or 5 years working with residents around sustainability, particularly in the communities of color and people who are poor, because this is kind of the topic today. So we've been around for 35 years, which is important because we do provide direct service, technical assistance, education, and advocacy. So we kind of have our hands in a lot of places, but with that, we have a lot of expertise, both technical expertise and experience, and we can helpfully influence policy decisions because we come to the table with knowledge. So I think I looked at the flyer, and it stated who was responsible. But I think before we start talking about the issues and the impact, we really need to look at and investigate history and how residents are segregated and how communities, what we see today, how they got there, what were the policies, what were the decisions that were made historically that were put in place that actually created some of the conditions we see today. And we can't have a conversation about poverty, economic justice, climate justice, and health disparities without really, really going back and talking about how race is related to it, how redlining is related to it. Because we're dealing with, and I've been working with Mike for a long time, substandard housing and health. And so a lot of times in a lot of rooms, we talk about the data and we lay out maps and we talk about the people who are impacted, but it really takes some, a hard look, which sometimes is uncomfortable for people to talk about, is these things that were values that were actually policies implemented based on folks' values and practices that advantaged some and disadvantaged others. So let's not talk around it or about the people, but let's really dig into the issues and the root causes, because if we don't talk about the root cause of poverty or root cause of whatever issue we're discussing, we really band it and we keep talking about these same maps and stats. So at this point, it's not easy. No one has all the answers at all, but we do need to start taking a different approach to how we do our work and a different approach to how we engage folks who are impacted by a lot of these issues. So if you haven't heard about Place Matters or haven't seen these stats around where you live can determine how long you live, there's reports, and I'm on the Cuyahoga Place Matters team, and it's a national movement. And so Dr. Iton from California came out with these stats, and he felt like Cuyahoga County was the worst. And all of this is related. And hopefully, as we continue to talk and have these conversations, we could start making more connections and not kind of work in silos and separate the issues out, because it's not really helping anyone. It's not helping anyone. So I don't necessarily do presentations on climate change, you know what I'm saying? Because I really don't talk about it in that way. I do work that's related because I really am more on the grassroots side, less of the policy side, and I'm learning as I evolve. But I did see this, and we know that 38% of African Americans live near industry that polluting industries. So this has come out, and this man Stephen Hirsch, I think he writes a lot about environmental justice, people of color, and try to show the relationship. So when we talk about poverty, we have to talk about where people live, why they live there, and their inability to be as mobile, which creates a lot of vulnerability. So I said 38%, so it's 68%. And I took these stats out of that article that I just showed you. And so it's compared to 56% of the white populations. And we could talk about renters, and that's when I learned a lot from Cleveland Tenants Organization about the justice aspects of renters. Half of our people in the city of Cleveland rent their homes. So you take that control away. So you really need to understand that when you're talking about all these issues, that people don't necessarily own their homes, stay in a particular neighborhood, they move around. So systematically, what differences are we making? Because we can't just chase people around that way. And then we constantly point to make them do all the hard work, when if systematically we make some changes, then we can remove some of those barriers to thrive, to having people thrive where they live. They shouldn't have to continue to move out of the city in order to have a quality of life. So this is what's going on. We talk about industry and polluters and blah blah blah. What's going on in the communities, and then we talk about health. A lot of times I've been in these conversations around sustainability and whatever, but the whole justice piece is left out in the health. If we're not healthy, how are we sustainable? If we're not healthy, we can't live. If we're not healthy, we can't participate. And so I think that we really need to start to deal with that first sometimes, and then continue to move the needle on these other issues that are related. So I pulled a report for this particular presentation a couple of months ago, and we talked about where people live in the last slide as it relates to pollution and air quality. And so now we talk about the issues around the rights of, where they live, and do they have to live in substandard conditions? Well, if they can't afford to move, they can't deal if you have a flood, right? And I can't just get up and walk away or get up and move. So this is kind of what people are earning and what they can afford, and what conditions we see in our city in regards to affordability, affordable housing, and the issue of someone being stuck where they live, because it is also related to social cohesion and how we get out of situations if there are events that take place. And so, I just bring this story. I don't need to talk about this story, but this is the picture from Katrina where, people could not just move. There's some people who didn't want to, but then you had the issue of people not being able to get up and leave an area because there's no transportation, there's no money. How were they supposed to do it? And so the latest was Hurricane Sandy and the poverty and the relation between poor and what the event was. And so they say 43% of the folks who were affected, the incomes were less than $30,000 in the affordability and the rental situation. So transportation, I bring this up because between 25 to 66% of folks living in those communities, you saw the map before, and they don't have cars. So where are they going? If you're an elderly person, where are you going? And we use this slide to talk about food and access to food and food deserts, because we have to start making those connections. But then you talk about health, or people going to the doctor or whatever, and you really need to start to dig into more of the situations going on the ground to understand why people are impacted and what opportunities they have to actually remove themselves from a situation. So Stu Greenberg was actually my boss, and then Mike Pesney was, but Stu Greenberg did some work around emissions and housing to look at what were we putting out as a community. And so we learned that we're the fourth largest CO emitting county in the United States. That stat might have changed, but this might have been a few years ago this was done. So when we talk about heat days, we might not see a lot of flooding like Katrina, but we have a lot of folks who are asthmatics. We have air quality issues, and if it gets hotter, then the people with asthma, respiratory conditions, will suffer the most and suffer the greatest. And so if you think about your house, and if you're hot, you could just turn on an air conditioner. Well, someone who's vulnerable and they don't have money to get an air conditioner, that house is not conditioned, it might not be weatherized, it's hot, and back to the connectivity piece of people checking on each other. If I'm an elderly woman and I live in a high rise and I'm hot and I don't have a air conditioner, no one's checking on me, and I can't get up and down the stairs, the elevator shut down. Where am I going? So this can be horrible for someone in that position. And I had a young lady from New York talk about a situation that happened like that with the elderly person. It was Hurricane Sandy. The elevator was shut down, and they were in a high-rise apartment. So, like, who was going to respond, and how would they help assist that woman in those events that happen as a result of climate change? And we have a stat that 50% of Clevelanders are without conditioning, and when it comes to a heat wave. So this is just some more stats on asthma and the depth of the problem. So when we talk about these health conditions and health disparities, we have a health equity frame or an environmental justice frame. So we do talk about race and folks who are mostly impacted. So if you have asthma, 1 in 5 children with asthma went to emergency room for care in 2009. Black adults are hospitals for asthma more often than white adults. And Black Americans are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from asthma than any other racial ethnic group. And more than 1 in 4 Black adults can't afford the medications. 1 in 5 Hispanic adults can't afford medications. So it is complex, but these are the issues that we need to start to discuss and how they're related to the overall topic of poverty and climate change and impact, and what does it really look like in a household with folks who are poor. So how do we talk about it? We don't. We act on it. So I think that we learn, and we're trying to learn how to start where people are. We can't walk into a space and have these preconceived ideas and agendas that don't work for folks. So listening is extremely important, being humble enough to take that and then say, okay, well, based on what you said, maybe this is how we need to approach dealing with this issue, still trying to attack the issue, but making it culturally appropriate or specific to addressing particular needs and getting the work done. So air, water, food, shelter, those are basic needs. So with that, we started this Neighborhood Leadership for Environmental Health process. And out of that, I learned a lot about what people wanted around sustainability. I didn't have to beat folks over the head. They're already living in more sustainable ways anyway, and they're recycling and they're not driving a lot of cars. So in a sense, they understand sustainability. It's just the fact of who is defining that, who's defining sustainability, and who understands it in different ways. And it's okay if it doesn't look like what came out of some other place or space. So with that, the cooking classes in particular, I really worked with folks, never gave them meat. I used African American caterers who were vegan or vegetarian, and that's how I conducted all of my education sessions in the community. People would come, and so out of that, I learned people wanted to learn how to cook. And we talk about community gardens. Also learned that a lot of folks didn't know how to cook the food that they got from the garden. Say it was free. You still don't create access because they don't know how to cook the food. So that's where you wondering what am I doing with the cooking classes? Well, if you reduce meat in your diet, it's the direct connection to climate change and processing meat, and the demand is not there, you remove that. It is a personal decision or behavior, but we could teach on that level as well to get people to understand those connections. I don't know if I did a great job with that, but I had another opportunity to really model that cooking class in another city through EPA, making that connection very clear about how reducing meat actually affects the environment. And greenhouses was installing gardens, talking about composting, energy efficiency in the home, and having folks learn practical solutions to reducing air flow if they lived in a house. And then the Deep Green and Healthy was extreme weatherization or extreme insulation. It was a research project, and it was around energy efficiency. So we just kind of do the exchange and have people understand where they live is important as far as their home, but also how what they do impacts the rest of the community. I only have a few more seconds, so I won't go into all of the detail of this, but this is kind of how we use how are we emitting and what we're trying to do about it. So we really want to focus on energy efficiency application in low-income neighborhoods. I have some documents here that you can take with you, some activities around lead poison, but also a little more understanding about the Deep Green and Healthy research project we did. And I really want to expand on that and talk about how we look at green building and energy efficiency in low-income communities, modeling through the built environment, along with all the other things. So we know that climate change is an issue and climate justice efforts are going on, and we need people of color to be leading some of this work because they're the most impacted. So with the conference that's coming up, Elizabeth from Uprose in New York actually was very engaged in that climate march, and she was kind of leading that, leading the people of color participating in that in New York. So she'll be here for the conference on Thursday next week. And there's Julian Ajima, who's a planner who talks about sustainability, and it's a really great conference. So you could take a flyer with you, but she's specifically talking about climate justice on Thursday. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just As Mr. Foley begins his presentation, he has a couple of handouts. We'll be passing those around as he starts.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for allowing me to come out this morning, especially speaking with Kim. Kim is a great resource in Cuyahoga County, and her organization is really a fine organization. When I was the director of the tennis organization, we did a lot of work with Environmental Health Watch, and I think it was Kim. We did a lot of work in kind of low-income apartment buildings. There are high asthma rates in a lot of buildings, and there was also a lot of cockroach problems. And Kim and Environmental Health Watch were the ones who really kind of helped make it clear to both us as an organization and to tenants who are working with that cockroach feces is a trigger for asthma. And so I hate to say that's why I associate with Kim, but that's but always very smart and always very helpful in terms of kind of making the case and helping people understand environmental health impacts in Cleveland. As Brian said, my name is Mike Foley. I'm the Director of Sustainability for Cuyahoga County. It's Executive Budish hired me last year. Chanel Smith is our Deputy Director. We're a two-person office, and our job is to work generally and on sustainability matters for both the county buildings, county facilities, county offices, as county offices, but also to think about the county in general and think about all the kind of issues that affect Cuyahoga County in terms of environmental matters and energy-related matters. I think Chanel and I think by next, Wednesday we'll have it all figured out for you, just so you know. We don't, but it's because there's a lot of work and there's a lot of things to deal with, and terms of just energy issues, lake water quality issues, river water quality issues, sustainability matters in general. There are a lot of things that we in Cuyahoga County have to look at and think about. And we're at this important place, right? We are on the Cuyahoga River on Lake Erie. We've got all this great fresh water in our backyard. It's both this, obligation to keep it as clean as possible and useful as possible. There's a lot of people who also want to figure out how to use it, because there's a lot of people in the world who don't have fresh water or clean water, and are suffering through droughts and suffering through other messes that we all make in this world. So we've got a huge obligation to nurture the Great Lakes as we have them, and figure out how to keep them clean, keep them useful, and keep them available for people to be able to drink and use from. I wanted to go. I had passed out a couple handouts. I wanted to, when we talk about climate change, sometimes I just think it's kind of important to go back and just look at some of the reasons why we're having climate change. And as Brian said, I was a legislator for 8 years. I worked with Armand in the Ohio House of Representatives, and I tried to get this. We had a terrible bill called Senate Bill 310 a couple years ago. And Ohio had kind of these step-ups of, we were going to have more energy coming from our utilities. Were supposed to come from more renewable resources, and they were supposed to make energy more efficient. So we had a higher energy efficiency standard. And a couple years ago, Senate Bill 310 was passed, which gutted our standard in Ohio. It was led by First Energy, basically. It was because their business model did not comport to clean energy or energy efficiency. They had bought a whole bunch of coal-fired power plants back in the early 2000s, and so energy efficiency and renewable energy standards didn't comport with their business model, and they were able to convince kind of the legislature to go backwards rather than forwards. But I remember in Senate Bill 310, I tried to hand out this flyer because I said there's a lot of legislators who are going to vote for this bill, and I just at least wanted them to understand what they were, voting, what the context was for their vote. And in Columbus, at Ohio State's got some they've got some really smart guys. We were able to bring in one guy, Professor Lonnie Thompson, who has done ice core samples all over the world for over 40 years. So he goes to the Himalayas, he goes to Russia, he goes to China, and he just digs in these huge, long, tunnels basically into ice core, and is able to take it out, and then he takes it back to Ohio State and he reads it. And he can read the isotopes that go back over 400,000 years. So what was in the air, what was in the oxygen, what was the makeup of kind of the environment at the time. And so they've done ice core samples. They can figure out what the carbon dioxide looks like going back over 400,000 years on Earth. It's pretty remarkable, actually. And I think they've actually gotten even farther now, but this was as of a couple years ago. So if you look at this, there's kind of this blue squiggly line that goes, starts 450,000 years ago, and that parts per million is carbon dioxide parts per million in the atmosphere. And it's basically, over time, it's gone between 275, every once in a while it'll go up to 300, then it'll go down to 200, 275, 300, down to 200, and you can see that line. If you look at the red line all the way in the end, that's when we started, that's kind of the Industrial Revolution. That's when we started kicking up our ability to really produce things in mass scale. That number's just skyrocketed, right? It's just skyrocketed. So since we've become more efficient and effective at being able to make things, the amount of CO2 into the atmosphere, the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has just skyrocketed, which just affects our heat index or heat content on the planet. Secondly, if you look at the bottom, these are just various measurements of global temperature over the last 100 or so years, and it's just going up, right? And March 2016 was the hottest March in the history of the planet. by a wide margin. It was just announced a week or so ago. So we've got problems, right? And we all know we have problems. The legislature in the state put this 2-year freeze in the state of Ohio, Senate Bill 310, and has not been helpful in terms of trying to put together an environment in the state that is more conducive to developing clean energy. When I left the legislature and when Armin left the legislature, we were very angry about this. And at least one of the things we were able to do in the county was try to think through, all right, the state has stepped back. How can we step forward in terms of trying to find resources to do clean energy development? So last June, we created in Cuyahoga County what we're calling a clean energy finance hub. We hired some folks out of Minnesota called Eutetics, this company. It's very smart about both kind of understanding kind of capital deployment and mechanisms about how to get capital out into people who need it. And they've also just got access to a boatload of investors who just want to invest in clean energy projects. So we've been working for the last, 9 months on kind of putting together the mechanics of our clean energy finance hub. And I think we're going to be announcing our first projects next week when Armin does his State of the County speech. And so we'll have, I can give you a hint, we'll have some decent-sized energy efficiency projects we're going to be financing. We have been able to figure out, you guys have been great about solar out there, I know, but it took a lot of work to figure it out. We think we've got a tax credit investor who's willing to come in, and if we can bundle together at least 100,000 square feet of rooftop space for nonprofits and municipalities and churches, they're willing to come in and make at least the 30% investment into these installments. So we think we've got our at least 100,000 square feet of rooftop space, which will be able to basically write down the cost of solar installations for people who don't pay federal taxes and are not able to get the federal tax credit that exists. So we think we're going to be able to announce that. And then we're also trying to work, there's this whole Leadco windmill on the lake issue that it's complicated. There's a lot of it's expensive, but I think I'm hoping we're going to be able to kind of figure out the net on this and be able to make some announcements pretty soon that will allow this thing to move forward. So those are pretty exciting things. Lastly, I just wanted to go through. So. As I say, Chanel and I are a two-person shop, and the county is a county of 1.3 million people. We've got 59 communities, 59 cities, and a couple townships in the county. And I wish we could just by fiat just say, okay, everyone be green and do the right thing. But we can't do that. So we've tried to at least put together kind of a set of best practices for municipalities to take advantage of, and we've been working with David Beach. I don't know if maybe if many of you know David Beach over at Green City Blue Lakes, who's just an enormous resource in this. I mean, one of the smartest guys in the country around sustainability matters. And so David has helped us put together basically a toolkit, and I just kind of put the outline of it here. We don't need to go through it. But it's just kind of a toolkit for municipalities around a lot of measures around sustainability matters. So we go through air quality, energy, food issues, green building and historic preservation, land use and development, solid waste issues, transportation issues, trees and land management, and watershed management. And it's about a 40-page web. It's on the web. We purposely are doing this on the web and keeping it kind of on the internet on our web page, which is, I think I put it it's on the second to last slide where you can find it. But we want this thing to be living and breathable and updatable all the time. And so we've kind of got these different areas with both model ordinances, model best practices. And also, there are a lot of people in Cuyahoga County who deal with a lot of different issues and who are smart and who've kind of fought some of the, the battles in order to get a riparian setback, legislation passed in South Euclid or solar zoning in Rocky River. So people who are kind of good and who've kind of worked on some of these issues and are resources for other folks who may want to say, all right, I want to do, we want to set up complete streets, bike lanes and in Solon or something. Who do I talk to? So we've got good local resources in this toolkit who can help you walk through kind of different areas and different issues and things to think about if you want to, or if someone wants to work on this in their own community. And we're trying to push this out to everybody because we want, we met with the Mayors and Managers Association last week, and there's some mayors who are interested in city council people who are interested in different communities. But we also want some kind of ground up push on this as well. I want people calling their city council people saying, hey, I heard about that toolkit. There's this one issue around, groundwater management that I think is important. I'd like us to, work on that. So if you're interested, or you know anyone else is interested, both we're more than willing to come out and talk to folks about it, or talk to city councils, and David did as well. And so we think it's a valuable kind of resource that hopefully is updatable, and especially if you look through it and you see something that, there's either a better resource out there or some other issue that needs to be addressed, we haven't addressed it, then let us know, and we'll get on the web and update it as soon as possible. So I think with that, I'll stop, and then if there's questions, I'm more than willing to take questions. So.
Before we start the Q&A, let me make a couple of preliminary announcements. Most of you have heard this before, but we have a couple of clipboards. If you're not on our email list and want to be for announcements of forums, add your information to the paper. We don't use any of your information for any other purpose than this. There's also evaluation forms where we're asking those of you who have attended forums to give us a rating on the ones we've had so far this season, and also make suggestions and recommendations for speakers or topics that you want to see in the future. We're having our retreat to start the process of planning for next year in just a few weeks, so we need your feedback. With respect to next week's forum, it's on the Muslim community in Cleveland. It's the last forum for the church year. We have 3 speakers. It promises to be a very informative forum. With respect to Q&A, and we've gone over this before, but we find that a quick review is good. There will be a person with a microphone, Kathleen on this side, and Marlene on this side. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand. They will recognize you, and only the person with the microphone asks the question, okay? And when you get the microphone, you need to hold it right up here, like it's an ice cream cone, because otherwise it's not picked up by the recording equipment. Okay? Thank you much.
Thank you very much for this really interesting and informative presentation. As you look, Kim, particularly at low-income communities and neighborhoods that have been disinvested, and the needs there, whether it's lead poisoning or weatherization and all sorts of things, I think my concern is that when you look at public money in this county and city, it's going for a lot of private interests that benefit affluent people, whether it's the sin taxes for the sports facilities, the new county hotel, the opportunity corridor, whatever. How do you see a change in priorities that has been set really, I think, by the elite in this community, so that we have more public money and private money going to where it's needed for those needs?
Can everybody hear me, or do I need to step up here? So, the first step we're taking to really push for that we want to talk about upstream decision making and sustainable systematic changes, right? So our first push is around the lead issue because we've been doing it. We've been doing healthy homes forever. So we have a set of recommendations that we submitted to the city of Cleveland. First, that would generate income for them to sustain what we're proposing. These are very feasible, practical solutions. Because just like we work with residents, meeting them where they are, we got to understand where they are, this council or the building and housing folks, blah, 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 and the capacity at this point. So we're doing this slow walk with them to really get them to enforce a rental registry that would generate income over $2.3 million a year of our own money. And then if we get HUD dollars or we get additional funding, that's fine. That could actually fill the gaps with low-income homeowners, for example, that need resources that might not qualify for certain money. So that's what we're doing right now, and we're pushing for this change. So we'll be trying to grow that coalition of folks that will be insisting that the city start to put some skin in the game and not depend on funding to do the work that's necessary to deal with this preventable lead poisoning issue. And we have put money forth as part of our Build Health Challenge to actually bring the resources to get things started. And I could talk in more detail, but we have it laid out here.
My question is for Mr. Foley. In her book, This Changes Everything, Naomi Klein suggests that we have about a decade to get our act together or humanity is going to be in unimaginable trouble. And she talks a lot about solutions not being technologically moved forward, but coalitions and grassroots rebellion. And I wondered if those kinds of remedies, if you'd have a comment to make.
Sure. Does this work? Okay. Yeah. Look, she's amazing, by the way, and that book is a great book. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. And she's right, but I also think it's got to be kind of a bit of all of the above, so people making individual decisions and organizing and doing, the right thing, as they should be doing. You can afford to put solar panels on your car. That's a great, or on your roof. That's great. If you can afford to get a Prius, that's a great thing. A lot of people don't have the ability to do that. And so, what are other ways we can reduce our footprint? Those are important. We need to educate people as much as possible about that. And I think gradually, people are getting that. That's becoming more of a kind of a sensibility in people's lives. I really believe that. But I do think it's also policy, right? It's got to be what are we doing? How is the electric grid? How is the electricity generated on the electric grid, right? And if it's 70% coal-fired power plants, that doesn't work, right? That's not going to help us in the long term. So I think it's got to be all of the above. It's got to be people acting, in concert with each other and being smarter about things and individually. But also, I just think that the policy decisions that we're making, I'm just shocked, by the way, that we've got we've got a political party in this country that still denies climate change and global warming, and they may be putting forward someone who would get rid of the Clean Power Plan, who would do do as much as possible to go backwards again and be regressive in terms of energy policy in this country. So I think policy is really important in addition to kind of the individual work that people have to do.
Excellent presentations. But I'd be very interested in knowing what specific kinds of things are available in this huge neighborhood of poverty in the inner city. Are there community places where people can go who are elderly for programs, for meals, for activities, stimulus? Is there RTA service? All right, you obviously don't have buses that are going to everything, but can you call an RTA, those special small buses, so that you could access and help people to get to facilities where they might be able to get some of the things that they need, or could even be a health center? In other words, I'm really interested in the specific kinds of things that are available, or do we need to spend the money that you're talking about to create this kind of thing? Could you appeal to Carrier or some of these places for a small air conditioner that at least could go in a bedroom in some of these horrible houses that have no access during the heat of summer? So that's what I'm really interested in knowing, and what we could perhaps be petitioning for, as we know that this is what you're trying to access.
Well, we have a ton of programs and organizations, and we still see the same result. The issue is that sometimes it's not coordinated or it's not systematic enough to affect and impact folks and more coordinated. So what we've been talking about is connectivity and holistic approaches to the problem and dealing with the root cause. Then we wouldn't have to continue to fundraise, to look for pots of money and piecemeal, and then nobody knows what's going on this side of town versus the other side of town. You have all these people coming into the same community, knocking on doors of people who have multiple issues, and we need to do a better job as organizations to work together to create holistic approaches, but also tie it to policy and systematic changes, because we've been doing programs forever, and if the funding runs out, the program is over. So we got to stop doing those. This is what I was talking about, working differently. Programs are really good. I like them. But if I'm not talking to this organization or that organization, so when we're talking to the resident, we can connect them to play. But the RTA is cutting the routes now. I mean, they're trying to charge more money. If I can't afford $5 a day to get where I need to go, am I going to be able to afford $6? I mean, so you can talk more about that. But, I mean, you know, there's organizations focused on these different issues, and we do talk to each other, but it's difficult and it's complex, like I said, but it's the same people in the same communities, and it's just a layer. And we know that, so now how are we reacting to that?
I'm not sure who could answer this question best, but it's now possible, either through First Energy or IGS, to order that your electricity come from renewable sources. What exactly does that mean? The electrons, by the time they get to your house, don't know whether they've been generated by coal or wind. And what would you advise an individual homeowner to do?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny, tricky thing. So we at the county, by the way, just want to, our electricity contract was with First Energy, and it came up for renewal over the summer. And we put our contract out for bid, and we wanted 75% of it generated from renewable resources. AEP actually came in and bid on it, and we both we got a high percentage of the electricity generated from renewable resources, but it is also at $100,000 savings. So it was I just want to put a plug in, because we actually did save some money and went to a higher level of renewables. Yeah, what it means is that the generation sources, where they are generating the electricity, is coming from a facility that is, maybe it's wind in the Midwest, or it could be, maybe it's hydro in Ontario or Quebec or something like that. That the source of where the electricity is generated comes from a renewable place. You're probably going to pay a little bit more for that cost than just buying it straight off the grid from First Energy through the regular system they have. The PUCO, the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, has a website that you can look for called Apples. It does apples to apples comparisons, and you can actually go into the website and say, I want 50% of my generation of electricity coming from renewables, and it'll populate a page and it tells you, here's what the prices are, here's what the terms are, maybe it's a 6-month term or a year term, and where you're getting that generation source from as well. So the way electricity is divided up, it's divided up into transmission and distribution charges, which are just the line charges that come into your home, basically, and those are companies are not allowed to make money off of that. The generation source is where the generation, how they generate electricity, is the stuff where companies try to make money, and so that's what you can look at on this webpage. And I would encourage, look, I think there's more. It may cost a little bit more, but I think it's the more that there are people out there demanding that their electricity be generated from renewable resources, the more the markets are going to react, the more the utilities are going to react, and the more there will be put into play. I'm constantly amazed, by the way, at this First Energy ad campaign that's out over the last month. I don't know if you've seen it. They've got billboards up with windmills all over the place, and they're advertising about. They just did something in the paper last week. 1,000 people will now be able to buy 100% wind-generated electricity for what it costs for coal. It's incredible marketing that is just absolutely hypocritical to what they've been pushing for over the last 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, they really fought as hard as possible to get rid of this renewable energy portfolio standard in the state of Ohio, and their source of generation of electricity is mostly coal. So.
Hi, a number of us have just heard the talk by Dr. Eden at the
City Club.
The City Club, yes, thank you. And she was talking about, she's the author of a book, $2 a Day, which is about people who survive in our communities on $2 a day and how they do that, and they're working. Her litmus test, which we were talking about, was in any program that helps lower income people, does that program split them off from society, or does it include them? Is it an inclusive type of thing? So what this is, I think this is really interesting. In my community in South Euclid, they have a rental registry, and people are actually using it to discriminate. They think that it's a really bad idea to rent housing to people in the community. Meanwhile, I'm living next to a vacant house. There are vacant houses up and down my street that I know about because I walk my dog. And I don't want to live in a community with low density. I want those houses to be filled. Those houses want to be filled. It would just be so wonderful if there were renters in them. But that's not being used. There's an exclusivity that's coming in to a program that really is supposed to be inclusive, or, so I don't know, I just want to say that, and if you have anything to say, that would be great.
It could be an issue of income, class, whatever. So that's what's going on, because like you said, it'll benefit everyone, right? To have a community with people in it that could support business or whatever. So you got to ask the question as to why, other folks besides, I'm a person of color or I'm a low income person, but I need allies or I need someone else to support a policy or procedure that's more equitable. So those conversations need to happen. When you hear someone speaking in those terms, somebody needs to be in that room to address it. It can't always just be the same people. We have to grow this idea of equity and fairness, and when we see it here, we need to call it out. And that's a lot of times makes people feel uncomfortable, but someone has to be discussing it in a way that's going to include the folks that are often left out as well. We have to bring them in. We talk about solutions. They need to be part of the process. But sometimes they're working. So if you're in the room and they're at work, you can help with that conversation.
Thank you both for your presentations this morning. Remembering things I've read in Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, it seems that the fossil fuel industry has on its side forces that recycle money, outlined by Jane Mayer in her book, that go beyond simple, narrow, selfish, antisocial ends like the fossil fuel industry has. There is really a sort of ideological framework that tells us that any kind of government regulation is bad, and that the industry can police itself, and we don't need the EPA, started by Richard Nixon, or any other agency to help keep industry on a socially useful course. And the Heartland Institute in Chicago was one of the biggest, funded by the fossil fuel industry, one of the biggest perpetrators of this notion that climate change really isn't real. So with the money on one side and with good intentions on the other side, what are your thoughts on ways for campaigns, let's say in Ohio, to try to offset the tremendous financial advantage that the industry and its ideological allies on the right have?
Yeah, I've actually got a lot of opinions about this, so I'm sorry, I'll try not to. As I was a legislator for 8 years, and this state has some really good environmental organizations who care deeply about how the state's portrayed, what are the real ramifications, what are the real practical policy implications that come out of the state. And they're very good about coming and making themselves well known, and they're very polite, and they're very nice, and they have been very ineffective, I hate to say it, over the years. And so in the face of what you described, is that there's been the utility industry is very powerful. They've got, in Senate Bill 310, they locked up almost every lobbyist in Columbus, to come in and testify on their behalf, and had to, take people out to dinner and, all this stuff. And they gave a lot of campaign contributions to the people who voted to get rid of the energy standards. So I think that Senate Bill 310 was a kind of a watershed moment for a lot of people in this state. And Akshay is over here working with NextGen. I think there's a realization, especially among some of the Sierra clubs, the Ohio Environmental Councils. NextGen is now in the state working on more kind of proactive politics, I think. But there's really got to be some anger, I think, and some accountability around decisions that are made, and put people on the spot, so that if someone votes for Senate Bill 310, well, they should be exposed, right? Or people should understand in their district that they did that, how much campaign contributions they got from from the utility industry, from the fossil fuel industry, and what the consequences of those votes are. So I think there's a change in kind of attitude and organizing. I think I'm hoping that there is, and I know the Ohio Environmental Council is just they were a 501c3 organization. They've now formed a 501c4 organization, which allows them to be much more political, as well as different than informational. And I think there's some organizing that's starting to happen in the state, because it's got to happen. Because because I think the old techniques of being nice and polite and informing legislators just hasn't worked.
A somewhat related question, and that is, has anyone proposed that we have a tax on carbon in Ohio, which is revenue neutral, so that the resulting revenues from that carbon tax could be sold, redistributed as a tax cut, and actually refunded to the voter, to the population, or used for other purposes. Now, the idea in being this would be an incentive against the expansion of carbon.
Correct. No. I've not seen anyone introduce legislation like that. There has been legislation in, supposedly we're going to be a big fracking state once again when the price of natural gas goes up, and that there's more natural gas drilling in the state, in the southeast portions of the state, and that our tax on oil and gas drilling is like the lowest in the country, and so there's been a lot of discussions about raising that and then putting money into both a fund that would help Southeast Ohio and a fund that would help do clean energy development throughout the state. But there's been discussions around just doing bonding. There's this group out of Delaware that's they've tried to put something on the ballot a couple of times, and it hasn't gone anywhere, but to just raise a whole bunch of money and put it into clean energy production. I don't know nothing specifically around just a carbon tax in the state of Ohio.
I think they have one in California.
Kim, in terms of your work with asthma, is there a big smoking cessation component involved with that? I mean, my impression is that when people have asthma, they either smoke or there are a lot of people in their house smoking. And if you don't break that up, you can, you're wasting your time.
No, I want to say we're wasting our time because there's a lot of different triggers in the home. And what we try to do, we do home visits. That's the core of our programs, and we're working now with the HMO to actually get reimbursed, because we've shown through our work that if we go into a home of an asthma patient, especially one who's using the emergency room, we can cut those exacerbations by 58%. So we're moving that model forward to institutionalize it, but understanding where people are, where they live. You cannot go in and say, oh, you must stop smoking for any of this to work. We strongly suggest that they smoke outside, blah, blah, blah. We know that's a hard nut to crack. We go into the home. In a home visit, I say we have a value approach to how we go and talk with people and educate people in their space and in their home. But if we reduce roaches, if we reduce mold, if we reduce water intrusion and carpets and dust mites, and there's a list of things we can do, and we'll try to address. That's the hardest thing to do. And we need the residents in the home to own the behavior change. And if they're not ready, they're just not ready. We'll do the best we can. So I think we could still assist families, and we could reduce the trigger, and we could reduce this exacerbation. And I don't know, we still need to evaluate our approach, but we send them to the cessation programs, and we give them information. And that's not our main role, but we try to give them resources. And follow-up is, with our new approach, we'll have people following up for a year, so that case manager could continue to address that, where we usually wouldn't have the time or capacity to do that.
Hey guys, thank you for speaking to. Thank you for all your work every day. It's great to hear about it as well. I wanted to just real quickly say the Cleveland Tenants Organization. The Cleveland Tenants Organization is a really great group that works on renter discrimination and I know Mike could probably tell you more about that more than I can, but I just wanted to ask Mike if there's a what the feasibility of something like a feed-in tariff would be like in Cuyahoga County, and if that could play with the finance hub, and maybe even if you could let folks know what a feed-in tariff is, or if you think that's a helpful thing to have.
Yeah, I don't know that we're allowed to. I think we're preempted by state law from kind of doing. Counties only have so many, so many powers, right? So cities have powers, counties have powers, the state has powers. I don't think we're allowed to do kind of individual feed-in tariffs. Are basically your never had it. I know Europe has them, and like I think Germany has them, where you're just basically paying into your rate the amount that goes for the renewable generation of electricity. I think, right? So everyone does it, right? And it's just kind of a system-wide approach to feeding in renewable energy into the grid. I don't think we have that ability here. We've got two utility companies that service the county. First Energy runs the lines for most of the county, and then Cleveland Public Power has about 2/3 of the city of Cleveland. Cleveland Public Power is, municipally owned and operated utility, and they've become more interested lately in just trying to put more generation into their portion of the grid. So we've actually been looking to, we've been talking to them about some landfills that, capped landfills that you just can't do anything else with, right? You can't build on them, you can't, I guess you could put trails and things like that, but we are actually thinking about solar on some of these landfills that are just sitting there without anything else around. And there's no trees on them, right? So there's a lot of sun, and so CPP has been actually kind of interested in talking to us about trying to think through, all right, if we've got 100 acres of capped landfill in Brooklyn, and we can run a line out there, maybe we can feed that electricity as it comes into the CPP grid. So those are kind of the things we've been working on lately.
Okay, we started a little late, but we want to end on time. So no, this is it. I'm sorry. We have to cut off the last question. I apologize for that. Before we show our appreciation for our speakers, I wanted to mention that with my scurrying around this morning, I may have missed when this was announced, but there's some postcards on the back table along with evaluation forms, so you can share your opinion, if it is your opinion, with Governor Kasich, candidate Kasich, on the Senate Bill 310 that was discussed. Does anybody know what the postage is on these things?
It's regular.
What does that mean, regular? 47? Okay, that's a handy piece of information to have. So join me in showing appreciation for our speakers this morning, please.